comparing these two guys against each other is fool's gold. It's insane. Babe Ruth never saw the diversity of pitches that Shohei Ohtani sees throughout 9 innings of baseball. I don't think there were many wipeout sliders that Babe Ruth was facing. Like, that was a fastball, knuckleball, changeup, curveball league. There were 4 pitches, basically. You spitball. But it wasn't this stuff. There was no ghost forks. There weren't you've never even heard of coming out of pitchers' hands all the time throughout 9 innings. What Babe Ruth also never saw, beyond the diversity of pitchers, was a diversity of pitches and a diversity of pitchers. It was common for dudes to throw at least 150 pitches in an outing when Babe Ruth played. 150, 200, but they didn't even count pitches. It wasn't even on anybody's mind to count these things. You'd have a guy pitch 2-3 games in a row, and his pitch count after 2-3 games in a row would be 500, 600 pitches. So the sport was totally different. And I don't want to demean the competition that Babe Ruth was playing against, but let's face it. Those were professional athletes in their times, which meant they were grocery clerks. Grocery. They were grocery. Why can I say that? I need another sip of coffee. Grocery clerks. Good God. They were butchers. They were taxi cab drivers. They raised horses. They went back to their wheat fields and farmed in their off seasons. They weren't working out in facilities in Florida year round. They didn't hit the cage in Scottsdale months before the season began. They rang up Mrs. Mulcahy's cuts of lamb or whatever she ordered at the butcher store that day. Grocery clerks. There we go. I said it. Like there was a glitch in the matrix there for a second. Speaking of the lack of diversity of pitchers and pitches that Babe Ruth dealt with, he dealt with a total lack of diversity, as in racial diversity. Ice Cube said it best. Babe Ruth was good against them white boys, but he never hit a brother like Doc Gooden. And that's the truth. The game is completely different from the way it was managed. You think Babe Ruth ever saw an opener? You think Babe Ruth ever even saw a closer? Not once. Not once. Ohtani's out there seeing 3 different pitchers every 4 or 5 at-bats of his career. Babe Ruth would get 9 innings against a dude named Drizzly or something who was throwing, just mutton chops up there. The second lamb reference on the show today. Maybe it's time I get some lamb chops. Well, mint jelly. Ooh. With Tuesday's performance, Ohtani becomes the first player in baseball history to hit 10-plus home runs and strike out 35 hitters in a month. Now, Babe Ruth is the only other player that had a 10-home run month and a 35 strikeout month at any other point in his career. Didn't happen even in the same season, but he did that in his career. Let me put it another way. Because, to go back to Babe Ruth, it's such a different time ago, but there's still a human factor there. And I don't want to diminish Babe Ruth any more than I'd try to diminish the first car that ever won the first Indianapolis 500. I looked this up today. So the first ever Indianapolis 500 was run in 1911. And the car that won that day was, without question, a modern marvel for its time. A true piece of machinery that was greater than any other piece of machinery ever built to run a 500-mile race. And the first winner of the first Indianapolis 500 in 1911 clocked 500 miles in 6 hours and 42 minutes. That's a remarkable 500 miles in 1911. In 6 hours and 42 minutes. It's remarkable. That's the Babe Ruth of cars. How do you think that car would do today? When Elio Castroneves won in 2021, he won his 500-mile race in 2 hours and 37 minutes. So what is state of the art in the early 1900s and what would perform today are two totally different things. Now, I know that this is a comparison of machine versus man, but it's dramatic enough that I wanted to bring it up. There's no such thing as athletes are getting worse in modern athletics compared to the athletes of yesteryear. It's always bigger, faster, stronger, better developed, more researched, more prep, more concentration, more specialization. It's never getting easier. It only gets harder. I wish we had a time machine to really settle this debate. I would love to put Babe Ruth in the middle of a modern lineup. And you know what? I'll give the Babe 35, 40 home runs. He's special. He was special enough for me to think that he would eventually get the hang of it and he'd be able to handle elements of the modern major leagues. Like, that's how good Babe Ruth was. What I'd really like to do is put Shohei Ohtani in a time machine and send him back to Babe Ruth's time. Would he throw a no-hitter with every outing? Like, do you think there's a chance that Shohei Ohtani in the 20s and in the 30s would have hit 450, 500 off of the league with 100 home runs? I think he would have. I think he would have. So, you know, any argument trying to tell you that Shohei Ohtani's not the most remarkable thing of all time that brings up Babe Ruth is just, I mean, you're dealing with two different languages, two different alphabets. There's nothing in baseball today that really compares with baseball back then. Nothing.